Going back to how it is here in the UK, and now specifically for you, I mean, we've spoken a tiny bit about this before we came on air, a bit about the framing of different news organisations in the UK. I mean, it's a big case, obviously, that where Hamas is a very polarising, simply name that you mention to some people and instantly they're very riled up. But is maybe the whole point of this case to maybe try and change that status quo here in the West, here in the UK, for example, by just encouraging a more nuanced debate about what Hamas actually is, instead of the actual result of the case?
Absolutely. The way that the British media and the US media, the Western media, talks about Hamas specifically, the way that it talks about Palestinians is disturbingly racist. Like, it's extremely and openly racist. And we have this extremely obvious comparator now because of the war in Ukraine. And there's a clip of a gentleman from Sky News doing the rounds at the moment where he's talking about what's happened in Russia. Russia attacked Ukraine recently, right? Mm-hmm. And a child was killed. And the contrast is staggering. And if you remember, and this is not to throw Ukrainians under the bus at all, right? Ukrainians have gone through hell these last 3 years, if not longer, right? So I'm really not falling into the trap that the British media falls into of imagining that Ukrainian lives are somehow unimportant, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we saw something really ugly rearing its head whenever Russia invaded Ukraine. You had all of these American and British correspondents going to the region, and there was that clip that went viral of this guy saying something like, and I paraphrase, "These don't look like what you expect people to look like. They have blonde hair and blue eyes." And he was saying the quiet part loud, right? That's extremely racist. Like, these
they
are
have Netflix.
Yeah, these people's racial characteristics makes them fully human, and yet they're enduring this violence against civilians. And it's like, and then that just goes out the window with Palestine. It goes completely out the window. Yeah. And so that's the starting point, is that in the British media, in the Western media, it's entirely possible to engage in the most dehumanizing racism towards Palestinians. And that's not just in the abstract, right? It's not just this low hum of, oh, they're only brown, oh, they're mostly Muslims, which is there, this low hum of Islamophobic racism that obviously ties into the broader questions like the British role in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, and I could go on. But I also think it's more specific. It's the specific function of atrocity propaganda, the way that lies, as well as a certain way of talking about true atrocities that did happen, are used to justify literal genocide. So I think that's an important part of the picture, is that the logic of the genocide, as articulated by some of its most senior architects, right, people like Isaac Herzog and Yoav Gallant, these people who were quoted by the ICJ when that court decided, you know what, it's plausible that this is a breach of the Genocide Convention. Those architects are expressing the logic. They're saying, Herzog is quoted in that January of last year, that ICJ judgment. He says that, it's not true, I'm paraphrasing again, it's not true, this rhetoric about innocent civilians. They could have risen up and overthrown that evil regime, right? He's talking about my client. He's saying they all voted for Hamas, they failed to overthrow Hamas, and that means they are not innocent civilians. It's the literal logic of a genocide. And the British government, its client media, its sort of stenographers in the British press reproduce that logic. Mm-hmm. Now, it does seem as though, with some recent events, the British support for its little loyal Jewish Ulster, right, its support for the apartheid state is waning, because the sheer price that the allies of the Zionist entity are having to pay for their continued support for it is becoming too high. But I absolutely think that part of the way that colonial empires like the British Empire succeed in doing what they do is by dehumanizing the people that they seek to colonize. And I think it's the case, I hope it's the case, that if nothing else, this application has given people a chance to read about Hamas in a more objective light. And I should say, if people want to read these arguments, if they want to actually explore what the application is saying, if they want to read the witness statements that my client, Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk, has written, and if they want to read the 20 expert reports that support this application, they can do that themselves by going to hamascase.com and making up their own mind. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the function, I think. One of the functions of this application is that it creates space for a more sincere, a more nuanced, a more accurate, a more informed discussion than what it's possible to have in the mainstream British media, because those people are just deeply unserious and deeply racist, and they're extremely committed to the idea that there's a racial hierarchy and that Palestinians are towards the bottom of it.